So with Métis people being skilled in diplomacy and functioning through community governance structures, the transfer of Rupert's land to the British Crown created present-day constitutional space for Métis people. In 1863, ownership of the Hudson Bay was transferred from the then Board of Governors to the International Financial Society, whose preference was to sell off the land holdings. Métis people and others at Red River were unhappy with the sale of Rupert's land from the Hudson Bay to the Dominion of Canada without consultation of the people. At the time of the transfer, the colony was in a legal limbo as the government was working to acquire land. Section 146 of the British North America Act 1867 permitted the Crown to acquire the colonies, including Rupert's land, as part of the terms of Canadian Confederation. So in 1868, the Rupert's Land Act initiated the process under which Canada would acquire the territory. In 1869, the Crown entered negotiations with the Hudson Bay Company for the terms of sale for the region. These actions created discontent and were the impetus for the Métis political organization and physical action. In a move to develop diplomacy for engaging the institutional processes, Louis Riel Jr. proposed a joint council between the French and English inhabitants. The new council, with an equal number of French and English-speaking representatives, 12 of each, met to discuss the plans to protect the colony for all its citizens. Several meetings took place, culminating in November 22nd, 1869, with Riel declaring a provisional government to negotiate with the Government of Canada. During the land transfers, Riel and his council countered with proclamations made about desired rights and protections. Initially, the date of transfer was set for October 1st, 1869, but was delayed until December 1st of that same year. So during these challenging times, Riel took control of Fort Garry with little opposition. Governor McDougall, while waiting to enter the territory from Pembina, issued a forged proclamation asserting control over the territory as he was awaiting for the official documents from Ottawa. When the Métis people read it, they disregarded the orders, signifying their position by flying a provisional flag. When denied access to the Red River settlement, Governor William McDougall returned to Ottawa and a new diplomatic approach developed. At the end of December of 1869, the federal government sent Donald Smith to negotiate with the people of the colony. In the meetings held in January of 1870, Riel called for a group of 40 representatives this time, 20 French and 20 English, to create a new list of negotiating rights. During the negotiations, a militia force came west to take back Fort Garry, but Métis captured and imprisoned some of them. After a trial in the colony, one of those captured and imprisoned and eventually executed was Thomas Scott. His execution was significant because it was the event that led to Louis Riel's exile prior to 1885. So following the battle over Fort Garry, negotiations continued. On April 11, 1870, a Red River delegation composed of John Black, who was a judge at Red River, Alfred Scott, an English supporter of the Métis from Winnipeg, and Noel Joseph Richaud, a supportive Roman Catholic priest, arrived in Ottawa to negotiate with the federal government over the terms territory's entry into Confederation. So the Manitoba Act was passed in 1870 on May 12th, and control transferred to the federal government. What's significant about this negotiation and engagement was the government establishing land rights for Métis people. These land rights are part of what is used to prove ancestry today, the Scrip process. So the Red River settlers agreed to be part of Canada and agreed to a grant of 1.4 million acres for Métis children set out in Section 31 of the Manitoba Act, and also recognizing existing land holdings in Section 32 of the Manitoba Act. Unfortunately, the land promises were left unresolved until the 21st century. At the time, though, many got tired of waiting for the land they were promised, and they moved westward as part of a Red River migration and lived on river lots to continue their self-governing lives. Many of them moved west, joining others at wintering sites known as hivernants that were scattered through Saskatchewan. Some stayed in Batoche and some went further west and north. Initially, summer camps for Métis people, the wintering sites became permanent settlements as the buffalo disappeared. There was once again a setup of councils, and Gabrielle Dumont was elected the president of the St. Lawrence Council for Self-Governing Community. Batoche was now located on a territory that was claimed by the Government of Canada. This was now considered the territory of the Northwest Territories. So in 1869, 1870, during the change in government of the territory from the Hudson Bay to the Crown, Manitoba was in a legal limbo, especially starting in 1870 when the Canadian government showed interest in settling the West and completing the Transcontinental Railroad. These changes created different dynamic between the Métis and the government between 1870 and 1885, because now they were establishing a government on land that the government claimed to have effective control, and so the Métis actions were now considered treasonous. So through people's involvement in the transfer of Rupert's land to Canada and the creation of the Scrip process emerged for the settling of Métis title to land. So the Scrip process specified how the Canadian government intended to deal with the outstanding land claims related to the Manitoba Act in 1870. But although Scrip was supposed to be a fair process for settling Métis land claims, the process included methods for extinguishing Métis title to land and the issuance of land certificates. Nothing substantial occurred with Métis land claims until the Scrip system. But before the creation of Manitoba, people were collectively using administrative processes to assert their identity. So Scrip was not only a way to deal with land owed to Métis, but it was also an institutional process that further extinguished land titles so the government could clear more areas for settlement. Now, in comparison to First Nations peoples' negotiated rights, those negotiations for lands and resources happened through treaties, although some communities were excluded and had to fight to enter treaty negotiations, such as present-day Lubicon Lake Indian Nation and the Witchican Lake First Nation. During the settlement of the Robinson Treaties in Ontario in 1850, Métis people in the Great Lakes region of Ontario insisted on being recognized as Indigenous peoples, but the government was not willing to settle Métis right claims at the time. In the mid-19th century. So although Métis people managed to secure some constitutionally protected rights because some Métis signed on to Treaty 3 in Northwestern Ontario, most Métis people were not part of treaty signings. There were some treaty signings in Treaty 1 because the Scrip process wasn't available yet, but once the Scrip process was available, there were people who opted out of treaty and took Scrip, but to do so, they had to pay back any of the annuities that they had collected. Okay, so July 15th, 1870 is considered the date of effective control for when the government took control of Rupert's land and transitioning to land to the Northwest Territories. This date is also significant as it marks the deadline to qualify for Scrip. So Métis Scrip, officially known as half-breed Scrip, was issued to Métis people with the intent of extinguishing Indian title by granting land or money to individual Métis people. The government did not issue Scrip in Manitoba until 1876, and even then the process was not handled legally. When Métis people applied for Scrip, they were required to provide proof of evidence of their location on the date of effective control, and often the documentation supporting their claim was an affidavit given by a Métis witness who could verify their location. Today, July 15th, 1870, holds little significance in Canadian history. In fact, many Métis people are unaware the government viewed this date as an important marker. However, it remains an essential piece of history as it's the qualifier for Scrip holders and for those that were excluded from the Scrip process because perhaps they were south of the border hunting and have been disenfranchised from their identity as a result. Indeed, those excluded were unable to access any rights but still maintain culture and family connections. Today in the Prairie Provinces, most use Scrip certificate records to establish themselves as right-bearing people further to the community definitions. A serious issue with Scrip itself is that the extinguishment of Indigenous title to land should have been done at the community level and not the individual level, which leads to whether the title was properly extinguished, as those rules are laid out in the Royal Proclamation of 1763 and reinforced through the Hudson Bay Deed of Surrender that created the Manitoba Act of 1870.